All right, let's move on to things on the more serious side. British American Tobacco announcing it's going to close its last South African factory in Heidelberg by the end of the year. After 50 years of production, the plant is operating at just 35% capacity, and they say they've been undercut by an illicit market that's now controlling 75% of the cigarette industry. This issue, though, goes far beyond tobacco. From alcohol and textiles to pharmaceuticals, the shadow economy is estimated to account for 10% of South Africa's GDP, and that translates to costing the fiscus about 30 billion rand a year and wiping out thousands of legitimate jobs. Let's talk about why policy failures are outpacing enforcement and what can be done to stop the losses. Business Leadership South Africa's CEO Busisiwe Mavuso joins us now. Good morning. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it, and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Imani. Thank you very much for inviting me.
I want to start with, if you do a retrospective, right, on cigarettes alone, we'll get to alcohol and other industries in just a moment. Between 2001 and 2009, illicit cigarettes accounted for 5% of the market. By 2017, 30 to 35% of the market. Now we're talking about 75% of the market, Busi. How did we get here?
I think when you look at it, it's a number of factors, Iman. But I think when you look at it, the acceleration really came from a number of policy missteps during COVID, when the legal cigarette market and alcohol sales were banned, allowing the illegal networks to establish distribution chains that never closed. And I really think that subsequent to that, you saw the steep increases in excise duties on legal products, which created an even wider price gaps, that the illicit operators exploited. So you are sitting in a situation now that illegal boxes of cigarettes sell for about 15 rands, 20 rands, or whatever the case is, while the excise duty on a box of 20 of legal cigarettes is about 26 rands. So you can see that there is no way that the legal market can actually compete. Because if the tax on the 20 of packet of cigarettes is 26 rands, and yet the illegal market is selling a pack of 20, at 20 rands, 15 rands, you can see how that just kills, that legal economy, as it were, especially when you're sitting with the South African consumer that is seriously under pressure. If they have to sit and opine on whether to, buy the legal market or to actually go for a packet of 20 that is costing you 15 rands or 10 rands, then I think the decision is obvious, as it were. Yeah. So I really think that, it's been a number of things coming from a long way, Iman, that is actually led us to be here now.
There's no doubt that the market is there. As you say, people will vote with their feet in a context where, every rand counts, and people who do like to smoke will then go for a cheaper product. But it's still an enforcement issue, is it not? Because, whatever consumers prefer, that's on the one side. The other side is these cigarettes should not even be in the network at all.
It is an enforcement issue, and I really think that we really need to be very clear and be honest, Iman, and place this failure, this plant closure of BAT right at the doorstep of government. Many arms of government have failed to intervene in as far as, reining in the illicit economy is concerned. This is a classical textbook case of a car that has been heading towards a crash in slow motion. Warning lights were flashing for years, with both business and the company itself repeatedly raising alarms. Yet these signals, fell on deaf ears. Just in November, Iman, myself and the group CEO of BAT were having this conversation with Minister Pakstow to say that if there's not going to be any intervention, we are going to have to close this plant as BAT. I penned a letter to the minister and the DG to say, subsequent to our meeting, these are the interventions that we have proposed, and we are hoping that you'll come back, as the ministry, to tell us the way forward. He needed to get that assurance so that he can actually tell, and I think this is the difficulty, Iman. BAT is London-based. It's headquartered in the UK. So the British don't have any appreciation, nor the time or the patience for all the policy missteps that have actually been happening in South Africa. So this company needed to assure their principals in Britain that South African government is doing something about this. But when, I guess, there was no forthcoming deliberate, intentional, decisive action from government, they had to actually pull the plug at the beginning of this year, because they were saying we have tried so many things over the years. And I'm just talking about November. For the past 10 years, Iman, I've been in conversation where SARS has been involved, where National Treasury has been involved, where the presidency has been involved as business, pleading the case for the legal economy, and nothing has actually been forthcoming. So it is unfortunate that we actually find ourselves here and 35,000 jobs are going to be lost.
Yeah, 35,000 jobs. That represents across the entire, I think, the supply chain or the distribution chain. 230 direct jobs will be affected. There's speculation that they might then go the import route or the export route, they might transition to imports, rather, I should say. Other critics might say, well, it opens up the market to Zimbabweans. Zimbabwe's got, they can restart, and they had a once thriving tobacco industry and business. They're right across the border. It's an, African interests dealing, country to country. That's a subject, I think, for another day. But what I want to circle back to in a moment is the policy missteps. Or let me go there now, actually. Let's talk about those policy missteps, because whatever you think about BAT and their investment and the impact on jobs, we might see this happen in other industries. We'll talk about alcohol in just a moment. Who's responsible for those policy missteps in a context where we could see the dominoes start to fall?
SARS is definitely responsible. National Treasury is responsible. The DTIC, as the Department of Trade, is definitely responsible. The other alarm bells we are sounding at the moment, Iman, is that of the auto industry. We've had a conversation so many times. The letter has been written to the president, written to the DTIC, of the 7 OEMs, that are actually operating in the country at the moment. I'm now talking about the auto industry. I'm just drawing parallels, to indicate to you that we are going to be sitting with precisely the same problem if government is not going to sit up and pay attention. The 7 OEMs are continuously talking about the fact that these Chinese motor vehicles, these India motor vehicles, these Thailand imports, it's actually tantamount to vehicle dumping. They are saying it's an existential crisis on the South African OEMs. Now, you have these companies that have decided to invest their monies here, Iman, and this is what we keep on calling for as the South African government. We are saying our country is open for business. We are saying, come and invest here, come and open your plant and your factories here. And these companies have actually done that. That's your Mercedes-Benz, your Isuzu, your Ford, your Toyota, your Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and whatever the case is. They're employing South Africans. They're actually making sure that some of the other industries are actually benefiting, from the production that is happening in South Africa. And that is right in line, with what we want to drive as an agenda. Remember, we talk about driving export-led economic growth. So opening up the market, and you will obviously have imports, but you actually have to therefore control, how your imports actually happen. Because you talk about, as a government, driving industrialization. Industrialization means factories, plants, assembling, being done here. We continue to talk about value creation. You talk about localization. There is no way you're going to localize when you actually, allowing imports to flood our market the way they're actually flooding it. So there is no way you are going to be able to actually achieve that. And I worry that what is happening in the auto industry is definitely going to find, as South Africa, or put South Africa in this very same tough condition. Look at what is happening in the Eastern Cape with Mercedes-Benz. Mercedes-Benz is seriously in trouble. They've already closed one shift. A lot of people have been unemployed. Once Mercedes-Benz decides to finally pull the plug, and the tariffs are obviously exacerbating this. Once Mercedes-Benz decides to pull that plug, in the Eastern Cape, it's going to actually decimate that entire economy. And it's actually going to make our problem worse, as a country. So we're not saying we must stop imports from actually coming in, but we're saying there's going to have to be very deliberate rules and interventions. You're going to have to impose tariffs, on these imports, because they are not competing on the same level. The companies that are investing here have to worry about triple PE, have to worry about COSATU, have to worry about so many things that these imports, are actually not having to worry about. And Timu whatever is the same thing, Iman. So we're just saying that, there's something that we're actually missing from a policy, perspective as government.
It's so insane when you think about all of these different industries. I mean, I'll talk about alcohol, which is analogous to, to cigarettes in just a moment. But if you think about the automotive sector itself, I think in the last 2 years alone, the number is around 5,000 jobs lost. We saw Ford South Africa retrenching employees, Goodyear also closing their Kariega plant. A number of issues, also the legacy of load shedding impacting those decisions. But we seem to be in a pre-2017 moment with regard to alcohol. If we, again, just look at what happened with cigarettes in terms of illicit alcohol distribution. At the moment, 18% of drinks served in South Africa, that's 1 in 5 drinks, are drinks that are fake, are not legitimate drinks. We're likely then, if you look at the trajectory you're talking about, whether it is in the automotive industry or whether it is with cigarettes, to experience the same thing when it comes to alcohol. Are you worried that there's a kind of contagion effect that is driven by the inertia in government amongst policymakers and the lack of coordinated work between SARS, the DTIC, and law enforcement?
Absolutely. Very interestingly, immediately after the announcement of the BAT closure, we started getting calls from all corners of government saying, no, we need to meet, we need to tell you what we're doing about this and what are the cases. And the very next day, we met with SARS, we met with BMA, Border Management Control, because I think that is where the weakest link is, allowing, because you need to ask yourself, how do these illicit products, make themselves or get into South Africa in the first place? But we also know that there's a lot of legal factories operating in South Africa, which are actually producing illegal products, as it were. So we had that conversation, and I think, government came out, National Treasury, all the facets of government that have to do with this problem. And I think there is an appreciation that this is no longer just a peripheral problem. It is a structural problem. It was also interesting to see the SARS commissioner, yesterday pen an op-ed talking about the impact of the illicit market, in the South African economy. He talks about how this thing is actually, we have allowed, he says, as government, we have allowed, this economy to actually flourish. And it says it doesn't just stop at cigarettes, as you are saying, Iman. He speaks about gold smuggling, he speaks about illegal mining, he speaks about illicit alcohol, he speaks about counterfeit goods, and complex money laundering schemes. And he says it's not just illicit cigarettes in and of itself, it therefore opens way, to other criminal networks, because then through the illicit cigarettes, you therefore, have this sophisticated network, of illegal of the illegal economy actually taking place. So government has actually recognized this. And if you remember, I think in the last budget speech, the minister even made an allocation from a budget perspective to say we're actually going to increase the allocation of SARS to enable them to can effectively deal with the illicit economy. But I'm worried that it might be a little too late if we don't actually move with speed and become intentional about arresting this problem, Iman.
Busi, again, this warrants a sequel conversation. The shadow economy, as you say, across all of those sectors, effectively our economy is being hollowed out. We're not getting the tax benefit from those transactions. Jobs are being lost. We'll definitely have you and others back to discuss this further. We did reach out to SARS as well. They're in a closed period in the lead up to the budget speech, but certainly we would want to get a comment from them and from law enforcement. Busisiwe Mavuso from BLSA.